Hey guys, this is Stosh for DragTheBar.com. Today I'm making my debut video. I'm really pleased to be a part of the site, and we're going to be taking a look at some hands in the Holdem Manager replayer today that I've played within the last couple weeks. And so let's hop right into it. Here's hand number one. It's a 3-6 game on full tilt. We have a raise from the cutoff, who is Yoonjong Byeon. Sorry if I'm butchering that name, but he's one of the South Korean Red Pros. I play with him pretty much. He plays all the time in the mid-stakes games. I decided to flat on the button with King 10 suited. Um, both blinds fold. The reason I decided to flat is because Yoonjong is very predictable when he's out of position. He plays really straightforward, and I found it a profitable situation. If he has position on you, he can make life slightly difficult, but when he's out of position, he's uh he's not a problem to play against. Um, Also, something to keep in mind is the blinds. If they are squeeze happy, that would be um, something to think about and would go against us flatting here on the button. But I didn't think either of these two guys were extremely squeeze happy, and the short stacker was playing pretty tight also in the big blind. Okay, so the flop is, 7-2-5 rainbow, not a whole lot going on. He goes ahead and makes a continuation bet. King 10's a perfectly good hand to float here with. We have two overcards and a backdoor flush draw. This is exactly the type of hand that you should be floating with against a guy like Yoonjong, who plays really predictably out of position. So I go ahead and float here in position. Perfectly acceptable. The turn's a 7, pairing the board, and he's not the type of player who really, double barrels, triple barrels when he's out of position. Like I said, he plays really straightforward. I thought that I had a pretty reliable read on the guy. He goes ahead and checks. Now, that being said, I'm not super interested in betting here. I don't think I'm representing much. Maybe like a pair of 8s or a pair of 9s if I bet. But I think by checking back this turn, I think I can represent a made hand a lot better than I can by betting. I hope that makes sense. But to a thinking player who can read hands a little bit, a lot of times when if you check the turn here after making a continuation bet and getting floated, a lot of times people just try and take the pot away right then and there on the turn. And sometimes that's not the most believable line. Sometimes the lot more credible line is this, and that's to check back the turn here. By checking back, I'm repping that I have a showdownable made hand, and I think it's a lot more credible to an opponent who can read hands. So I go ahead and check back the turn here with the intention of taking the pot on the river. I think my line is just a lot more credible here. And the river is a jack, and he goes ahead and checks, and I make a bet, and my hand is totally misrepresented, and I think I sell that I have either, some sort of a pocket pair, a 5, a 7, and he just goes and gives up like he does when he's out of position, and I take down the pot with just king high. And this is called the delayed float, and you can use it against very specific opponents. Just know the type of opponent you're up against. this won't work against everybody, but you want an opponent like Yoon Jong who plays very straightforward out of position and won't contest a lot of pots. And, he can hand read, so by checking back the turn there, I think my hand goes from, in his eyes, goes to being a made hand. Okay, so let's check out the second hand. Okay, here again we have another 3-6 game. I have Queen 10 suited in the hijack, decide to open. Um, Tough button, flats in position. He's a really, really, really good player. And the small blind, who's like the fish, goes ahead and completes. And we take the flop three-way, and I flop top two. Of course, this is a really great position, but um, the real story here is on the turn. I just make a continuation bet, obviously, and I get floated by a really tough button, and the fish big blind overcalls. Turn brings another flush draw on board, but doesn't really complete any straight draws, so I'm happy about that. Fish checks, and now I have a decision. And here's what I was thinking, and this all boils down to stack sizes. We're a little bit deep in this hand, especially against the fish. By betting here, and if I get flatted again, especially by the button, there's a lot of scary river cards that can come, and it's going to make playing the river really difficult. He could potentially just outplay me by repping a lot of hands. So I went ahead and I looked at his like check two if no double barrel percentage, and if you guys you guys will come to learn that I really love the HUD stats, and I've put a lot of weight into those. And taking a look at those, some of the secondary stats that not everybody uses, are something I really take advantage of. And his percentage for trying to go for a steal on the turn if I don't double barrel is pretty high. So because of that and because of stack sizes, I decided that I would go for the check shove right here. And I think this hand really just shows that we need to think about not only, the street that we're on, but look a little bit further down the road and think about how we would be able to react against certain rivers and how certain opponents would play with those rivers. And if I just, it'd be easy for me to say, oh, I have top two on a draw heavy board, I should bet right here. But in reality, with stacks the way it is and the pot size the way it is, I think the much better play here is to go for the check, knowing that there's a really good shot that the button would try and take this pot away. And we got the added benefit of the fish big blind calling, and then we could shove it in. And it's not a gross over bet this way, and it makes our decisions easy, and it keeps us from having to play a river against a really good opponent in what could possibly become a tricky spot. And we get two folds and rake in a nice pot this way by just thinking a little bit ahead and planning the hand, looking at stack sizes, looking at the pot size, and taking a look at our opponent's tendencies. Okay, so we have 9-8 suited. We go ahead and open. This is a 3-6 game again. We get flatted by the cutoff. No big deal. Small blind goes ahead and he calls, and big blind folds. And we flop. Good flop for our hand, definitely. Open end straight draw. It's a paired board, unfortunately. But, okay, so the standard play here is to just make a continuation bet, and that'd be perfectly acceptable. But I thought the best way to rep strength here is to do something a little bit weird. because I know the guy who is in the cutoff and flatted my raise here, O Henry 83. I was had a pretty good read on him that if the pre-flop raiser checks, he's pretty much always going to try and take the pot away. Once again, it's one of those HUD stats that I like to look at that not everyone does. Um, so he goes ahead and bets, and I have the added advantage of seeing what the small blind does here before I have to act. So in essence, I'm kind of putting myself in a really nice relative position spot. Uh, the small blind goes ahead and calls, and I think we can really narrow down his range here to just either a 7 or most likely some sort of a pocket pair like sixes or below. Eights, I have an 8. That's a little bit unlikely. But, something like pocket sixes, pocket fives, or a 7. Um, that's what most people would be over flatting here, especially out of position with those small pocket pairs. So his range is like really well defined, and I'm not afraid of that overcall at all. I think he has a 10 a really small amount of time, and also pocket sevens a real small amount of the time. So I thought the best way to rep strength here, and we have a real nice draw to go with our hand also, and taking into consideration that Henry 83 likes to bet um, a lot of flops in position if the pre-flop raiser checks, and also that he likes to flat pre-flop, and it just goes back to knowing your opponent. And in No Limit Hold'em, it's so dependent upon having solid reads on your opponents, and I play against a lot of these guys very often on a daily basis, and you can really dig deep into the stats and dig deep into their games once you've seen them quite a few times, like I have. So I went for the check raise here, and I thought I was really repping an overpair or a 10 here pretty. I don't think I would really play a 10 like this very often, but I think an overpair. And in any event, I think their ranges are so weak that this is just going to take it down so much of the time that it's definitely a profitable play. And look, already in the pot, without my raise, there's $140 in the pot, and nobody has anything. And part of being a good player in No Limit Hold'em is recognizing situations like this where there is money in the pot and people's ranges are weak, and sometimes you need to leap on those situations and take the pot down, and that's just what I did right here. Okay, here's a hand from 2-4 deep table on full tilt. I like these tables; they're pretty cool. They put you in some situations that you're not used to being in all the time, and really lends for some creativity and whatnot. And there's also an ante involved, which adds to a little bit more fire and stealing and whatnot. Button opens standard 3x from the big blind. Uh, Small blind folds. I have ace queen. I decided to put in a 3-bet here. I don't love it just because we're so deep. This guy, when you're deep like this, it gives you a lot more room if you're in position to just screw with the guy. Especially when it's like a light 3-bet situation, like this is totally standard for a button raise and big line repops, because obviously the button's range is wide, and I know that, and that whole leveling thing. So I go ahead and 3-bet here. I wouldn't always do it, but I do here. He goes ahead and flats in position, which isn't a great scenario for me because it'll have some room to maneuver post flop because we're 200 big blinds deep. That being said, I did have some pretty good ideas on the guy. I played with him before. I had some stats on him. And also, when he flats here, I expect that he doesn't Well, we'll show the flop real quick. Okay, so King 4 Jack, rainbow flop. I go ahead and make a continuation bet, and he just calls. Okay, so right away, what can we start to put this guy on? Okay, so he doesn't have pocket kings, because pocket kings are always four betting here, no doubt about it. I shouldn't say always, but the vast majority of the time you would expect pocket kings to four bet here pre-flop. Certainly pocket fours, pocket jacks. King jack would probably be one of the more likely hands that I should be afraid of. And past that, I know he'll be flatting here my C bet with any sort of a draw, like any gutter, just a ton of gut shots and hands similar to mine, and probably even like some bear jacks. Well, definitely some bear jacks. He just has a lot of weak hands in his range. I guess what I'm trying to say is that his powerhouse hands, are few and far between, and most of his hands are either draws, especially a lot of weak draws, and mediocre made hands like a jack or some sort of a king. And, ace king is possible, I suppose, but he would, I'm sure, four bet that sometimes pre-flop as well. So we can discount that slightly. Blank turn doesn't complete anything. Since I decided that his range for calling my c-bet on the flop is weighted towards weaker hands, draws, and whatnot, and plus I have, still have a good hand here with my gut shot and overcard, and I think a double barrel here will take it down pretty good amount of the time. I go ahead and make a healthy bet, and he flats again. Okay, so here it still does not signal a huge amount of strength. If this was 100 big blinds deep, or just like a little bit over 100 big blinds deep, then I'd be worried that he's committed to the hand and that he does have something he's looking to put all his money in with. Um, but here, 200 big blinds deep, we get into these spots, and the river rags off again. I mean, unless he somehow has 5-7, which makes pretty much no sense at all. I think I have the best hand. I doubt he's ever flatting the flop with pocket eights or pocket sixes just as a pure float. I feel like he's probably always at least has some part of that board. And I still feel like his range is really weak. And I set it up perfectly with my bet sizing that I have exactly a pot size bet left. And I can push all in on the river as a bluff. And I can make him have, pocket kings, which we discounted that there's really, really likely that he doesn't have. Pocket fours, he's calling. Pocket jacks, he's calling. And king jack. And past that, I kind of doubt it. Maybe ace king, but we also kind of discounted that also slightly, thinking that he might four bet that pre-flop. So his range here to what he'd actually call with is pretty thin, and this bet only has to work 50% of the time here on the river to show a profit, and I think it's easily going to do that. So I go ahead and shove it all in, and he folds. Another thing that I should have mentioned here with this guy is that another stat I like to look at is, of course, went to showdown, and his went to showdown was low, so I knew that he had the tendency of putting money into the pot and then folding later on in the hand if he showed some pressure. But also, I took a look at his fold to continuation bet and 3-bet pot stat, and that wasn't all that high. So I know he'd be flatting my 3 bets, especially in position, not exactly super strong. So I think this is a pretty cool hand. Just demonstrates, a lot of things about 200 big blind deep play, and how I'm making his um, I'm making his value range. His value range for most people, their value range is going to be real small by the river. I do a lot better job of showing strength throughout the hand, and I have a lot more hands in my range that are betting here legitimately, and his range that I'm worried about is a lot smaller. I like this hand quite a bit. I'm on the button, as you can see, with King Queen offsuit. It gets folded to me in a 2-4 game. Uh, 100 big blind stacks for me. I go ahead and just min raise the button. It's pretty standard for me against aggressive big blinds who will be 3-betting you a lot. Well, big blind and small blind, I should say. Small blind goes ahead and folds, and the big blind 3-bets. I have a choice here. I could kind of turn my hand into a bluff. Well, not kind of, yes, turn my hand into a bluff by 4-betting here, and then I would be folding to a push. But and that's not and King Queen is actually an okay hand to do that with, because it's less likely for him to have pocket queens, pocket kings, or ace king, because you're holding those cards. But in this case, I just decided to flat. I don't think I had a tremendous reason for it. I just did it, I guess. I don't know. Not a big deal, and that's not the main point of the hand. Great flop for us. Super dry board with top pair with second kicker. I'm more than willing to get my money in here. The best, the question is, what is the best way to do it? What is the best way to get money in here um, against this guy? He goes ahead and makes a continuation bet of about half pot. Okay, so how am I going to go ahead and play this hand? Now, this guy's a good hand reader, no doubt about it. He plays a lot. I've seen him around quite a bit. So I thought the best way to sell that I didn't have a king, and I wanted to look, as bluffy as possible here, because my hand is so strong, is to go ahead and raise. I think most people here would just flat, but I thought against this guy, the best play to look bluffy was to actually raise. And the reason for this is because the board is so dry, and this is a play that a lot of people make. Um, when the board is so dry and it's really unlikely for your opponent to have hit it, sometimes people just put in a raise here in position, and it's a good play. It's a really good play against certain opponents who aren't quite at that level of thinking. And I thought that this guy probably was at the level of thinking that he would know that this is a good board for me to bluff, so he wouldn't buy it, and it worked out perfect. Um, he went ahead and 3-bet small, and I just went ahead and clicked it back, and at this point he just had to be spazzing out. There's obviously so much money in the pot already, and it would only be $168 more for him to get all in. Um, he shoves, I called, and he has pocket jacks, and he's drawing, super slim, and the board runs out good for me. Um, so I think this is an example of exactly what I'm talking about, is repping a bluff when you really have a made hand, a big monster made hand, and I'm clearly at the top of my range here, with the top pair second kicker, near the top of my range anyway. And this is just an excellent board to bluff, but I knew that this guy knew that, or at least I thought that there was a good chance that he knew that, and he would give me a small amount of credit. So this is just another example of knowing your opponents and no limit hold'em, which I'm a big proponent of, and you know, just trying not to have my hand be face up. Okay, I have 6-5 suited here in the cutoff. Folded to me. I make a raise, button flats. Small blind folds. Big blind goes ahead and overcalls. We see a flop. 4-5 ace. Good flop for me. You know, I have middle pair, so it gives me some, you know, some real value. Plus, I'll have a pretty good time, pretty easy time repping the ace since I was the pre-flop raiser. And I have, you know, some backdoor draws, backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, whatever. Okay, big blind goes ahead and donks into a multi-way pot. Okay, so the first thing that we need to look at is, the first thing I always look at anyway, is this guy's donking percentage. It was quite high, so right ahead we can think that his range is not strong. You know, some people here are only donking with like really big hands, but into a multi-way pot on an ace high board. But for this guy, it's not the case. He donks quite a bit, and I also went ahead and looked at his went to showdown percentage, and it wasn't all that high. So I felt like I could definitely take him off this hand with a little bit of aggression. I go ahead and make a healthy raise. I'm not super concerned about the button. If he woke up with pocket fours or pocket fives or something like that, then good for him. But the range of hands that he legitimately hits here is next to nothing. So the button goes ahead and folds, as most likely is gonna happen. Um, the big blind goes ahead and calls. Okay, so let's also think about this in a hand reading perspective. If the big blind had a big ace, he would be 3-betting here most of the time. If he had ace king or ace queen, we'd usually expect to see a 3-bet. But his VPIP and his VPIP especially is pretty high, so he's more than willing to play a lot of hands. Another thing I always go ahead and I look at is how often he flats raises, especially steals from the blinds, and he did that a decent amount of the time. So all these things just add up perfectly to his range being fairly weak. We pick up a flush draw on the turn, good turn for us. Um, he goes ahead and checks, and this is just a spot where you just trust yourself. You have a good read, even though you fired one bullet and got called. You're repping a very good ace, and that fits your range a lot better than his. You were the pre-flop raiser, and we looked at all of his stats, and just everything adds up. And don't be afraid to just put in a big bet here and really put the screws to this guy, because he is gonna fold. We looked at all of his stats. He has a low went to showdown percentage. He donks all the time. He calls from out of position. The guy's just leaking money, so we might as well take it. Just stick to your guns. And we have backdoor outs, no doubt about it. A 5 or a spade is probably good for us. So even if I didn't have it, though, I'd still fire the same bet, just because we're telling a story, and I think everything adds up here for us, and we get a fold. So ship it. Another 2-4 game. We have ace-9 suited on the button. Notice that there is a poster in the cutoff. I don't know why he's a poster. He must have sat out for some reason, but now he's sitting back in. So that plays a big part in the hand, actually. Under the gun opens. He's a reg. He plays all the time. And he opens, fairly wide from all positions just because he's opening under the gun. Doesn't especially mean that his range is super strong, as it would for some people. Again, just know your opponents. And plus, that I'm sure he's good. He's good. I'm sure he recognizes that the cutoff is a dead poster, so there's some money in the pot. There's some dead money in the pot that wouldn't be there anyway. And a lot of people are just trained to go after that money right off the bat. I mean, that's been around for years and years. This little, if somebody post behind the button, just we're raising all the time. This guy in the hijack goes ahead and flats, and also the poster flats. Okay, now if this was most people, I feel like most people say, "Oh, I have a nice suited ace right here, and I have the button. I can go ahead and take a flop profitably by just calling here in position," which is probably true. Yes, correct. But I would argue here that the more correct play, the more plus EV play, is to raise, and that's what I go ahead and do here because I feel like there's some money in the pot, and everyone's range is weak. To be quite honest, the main thing I had to look at here is actually this SD Weeb 2 guy. I just had to make sure that he does flat raises from early position players fairly often, and I went in and I checked that stat. Again, that's just another stat that I look at. That most people who just look at pre-flop raise and VPIP, um, are never gonna look at. But I feel like it picks me up so many pots that um, other people would never would never get. So even though, yeah, I think the general consensus here with most people is I have ace 9 suited, I'm on the button, suited ace on the button, multi-way pot is sweet, definitely a plus EV situation, but I feel like the more plus EV situation here is to put in a 3-bet and just take the money down in the first place, and that's exactly what happens pre-flop. So again, just think through all your options. Don't just go into mindless thinking of sweet ace suited ace on the button multi-way pot. That's cool because there is other options. Okay, again we're at 2-4. Obviously ace queen suited in the cutoff. Go ahead and make our standard raise. Button flats. Um, both blinds fold. Okay, so even before we look at the flop, let's just take a look at our opponent here. The guy on the button only has $130, and this is 2-4. So right off the get-go, and he's not a short stacker, so we can assume that he's just some rando fish that wandered into the game and play accordingly. Flop nothing. Go ahead and make continuation bet. He goes ahead and calls. Okay, fine and dandy. Uh, Board pairs on the turn. Um, I feel like I probably have the best hand right here, but um, I can't be sure, and I feel like betting, getting all in here on the turn with ace high, maybe slightly thin. You could convince me that it's okay, but in any event, I went ahead and checked here, and he checked back. So when he checks back, I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a made hand, because if he did have a made hand, he'd be betting here, no doubt about it. Even like pocket nines, I don't think he'd be scared. Plus, he's flatting on the button with a wide range. He's some rando donk. King on the river. I don't see how he has very many kings in his range. I don't know what kings are calling a flop bet with, like, because there's no draw or anything with involving a king. And I feel like king high is probably just folding here. And if he did have king high, he's definitely shoving the turn because I showed weakness. So I felt like I have the best hand here, And the best way to get value out of the hand is honestly is the check call here with ace high. Like, I'm willing to check call for stacks, even a slight over bet. So I check on the river and he bets the pot. And I go ahead and I'm happy to call here with ace high, and he shows a busted draw, um, which I think he played quite terribly. Okay, pocket queens on the button. Under the gun goes ahead and opens up. Under the gun +1 flats, and it's to me on the button. Okay, so I feel like for most people here, just the stereotypical thing is just put in a 3-bet because we have pocket queens, and that's awesome, and we're willing to get all in pre-flop with that sort of a hand here. But I felt I wasn't so sure of this under the gun guy. I didn't know him too well. He was playing fairly tight, so I decided to flat here, and also I was slightly suspicious of the under the gun +1. So I decided to flat, and also in the back of my mind is that both blinds were definitely squeeze happy, so I could end up getting it in really good here against them sometimes. So, and I have the button, so I think calling here some percentage of the time is kind of a tricky, cool play. I don't mind if you go ahead and raise here, but sometimes I just like to do, I try to disguise my hand a lot of times as good as possible and make people misjudge my ranges. So on cue, the small blind goes ahead and squeezes, which is awesome for us. We're going to get an honest answer out of everybody in the pot. The under the gun and the under the gun +1 guy especially. We're going to get an honest look at their range. Under the gun folds, under the gun +1 goes ahead and folds, and we're just in a terrific spot. Um, a lot of people here, if they suspect a squeeze and they have something like pocket 6s or 7s, they'll just go ahead and put in a 4-bet. That's a play I used to make. I think people have caught on to that now, and they're willing to play for stacks with a little bit weaker hands than what they used to. They don't need ace king or jacks plus. So, I don't think putting in a back raise here with pocket 7s is all that great. So, I've kind of changed my ranges around a little bit from what most people do. I used to do it, not anymore. So, I obviously put in the back raise here. Uh, and I just decided to shove all in. I thought I repped a bluff here, or at least like not a strong hand as good as possible. I was trying to rep like something like pocket 7s. I was trying to get a fold pre-flop and with some money in the pot. But I think he read it for exactly that and ends up calling here with ace queen, which is obviously a terrific result. We get the money in as a good size favorite. And he misjudged my range greatly, and the board runs out good, and we ship a nice pot just because we played our hand a little bit differently than normal, and we definitely had a read on the blinds that they are capable of such a play, and it worked out for us pretty well there, so that was cool. So yeah, this has been my first video for DragTheBar. I'm really happy to be here. I'll be in the forums all the time. If you guys have questions, comments, just want to chat, that'd be awesome. So this has been Stash for DragTheBar.com.